Good morning. Thank you for joining us for this month's edition of Coffee Talk. My name is Sean O'Brien, the president of QwickRate, and as always, I'm pleased to be joined by Steve Huntington. Steve, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks again, everybody, for on this Friday morning. My name is Steve Huntington. As Sean mentioned, I've been working with QwickRate to develop these products for a little over a decade, and spent my entire career working with community banks around the country in everything from strategic planning, valuation to M&A and capital planning. And yeah, today we're here to talk to you a little bit about credit trends and CECL. Answer all those questions that you have for us.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Steve. Again, most of you have been on these before, so just the kind of the obligatory reminder, just throughout, hit the Q&A box or the chat feature. Steve and I'll be monitoring those and taking those either throughout the presentation or certainly at the end of it. Again, we've hopefully, I think we've delivered on a way to stay in touch with you, to share what we're hearing, what we're seeing. Hopefully also, when applicable, share with you improvements we're trying to make to the tool, but most importantly, give you an opportunity just to have questions answered in a kind of an informal group setting. So thank you for making these sessions so productive for us and for everyone. Again, more recently here, we've just been asking a few polling questions. I'm going to ask you to indulge us and take part in those again here this morning. We just have 4 today. Again, a lot of these will be familiar, but the first one again being what concerns you concerns you most over the next 12 months, and we'll just do a single choice here. We'll just give this another 15 seconds or so. Okay. All right, so I'm going to end this. Not surprisingly, liquidity still kind of tops the chart, but I would say from last month, credit quality's picked up a little bit. So again, I think that's interesting. I think we had the same answer in there twice. Oops. Yeah, I think I think certainly as we continue to speak with banks and certainly speak at meetings across the country, it certainly does feel like, while still not showing up in our numbers, credit quality is certainly beginning to resonate with everyone. And then certainly liquidity has been and continues to be the primary focus for most of our institutions. All right, so next up, let's whoops. All right, let me go back here. Kind of a similar question. Are your past due loans higher or lower than this time last year, or about the same? So again, I think despite the fact that we all kind of start to feel a little bit of credit anxiety, the numbers, certainly are nearly as stellar as they've been for most of the year and for recent history here. So we'll give this just another 10 or 15 seconds. So we'll end this one and share those results. And again, not surprisingly, 65% of you say they're about the same, 20% are higher, and 14% are lower. So thank you again for participating in that. Let's go on to the next question. Again, questions around the reserve. Will you be increasing your reserve this quarter? One of the reasons I asked this is a little bit of a loaded question. Again, I think it's important for all of us just to keep in mind that, as the regulators have said, part of CECL is the idea of expected credit losses. And Jeff Geer from the OCC this summer had made the point that, he personally, would have anticipated institutions starting to increase their reserve, given the backdrop of what, feels like, might be the chance for credit issues moving forward here. So again, a little bit of a loaded question, but let me go ahead and end this one. 64% of you say no, and 36% said yes. So let's go to the final question now. Oops. And regarding deposits, again, with liquidity being front and center for most of you, just are you still experiencing deposit outflows at your institution? I think as we speak anecdotally with banks across the country, most of you are still seeing some outflows, certainly not at the pace we saw earlier in the year, but I think still enough to be keep us all a little bit more anxious than we'd like to be. So let me just give these another 10 or 15 seconds. This is actually this is I guess kind of what I'd expect. 55% of you are, 45% no. It's actually a little bit better on the no than I would have hoped. So that's really encouraging to see. So let me share those. I don't think I shared those results. 55 and 45 with the deposit outflow. So again, thank you all for indulging us and answering those today. Let me stop these and X out of that, and we'll kind of jump into today's discussion. So, I think here as we get ready for another quarter of filing, not a lot has changed since last month. We continue to try to, fine tune some of the enhancements we've made. So we appreciate your patience with us as we've kind of worked through that and then worked through some issues we had when we released those. But certainly the warm options, the templates, the new summary page, and then as we've talked the last couple of months about the auditing tool. Last month, we were hoping to have that ready for today. We put it out early in the week. We had a problem with it, so it'll go again on Monday. So I know some of you saw that and were out there and had some difficulties with it. So I apologize, but we did take it down because it wasn't quite working the way we wanted. The IT team has worked on it this week, and our anticipation is that we will release it over the weekend, so it'll be there Monday morning. So again, appreciate your patience with us with that tool. But Steve, just again for everybody's benefit, do you just want to kind of walk them through the tool, and then I don't know, so if you want to pull it up live or
I'm gonna pull it up on our website. It's an internal version of our website, so you guys won't see this link today, but you will see it on Monday. As you can imagine, putting this functionality in an Excel environment sort of releases it to the world a little bit. And so we wanted to clean a few other things up behind the scenes before releasing it to make sure that there would be as few issues with different types of institutions trying to do different things with it than we had anticipated before. Why don't we go ahead and share my screen here?
Okay. Yeah, I just stopped.
All right. I'll see if I can get this to work here live. If not, we'll go back to the screen, but I believe I shouldn't have an issue.
I can see it.
Okay. All right, so here in the tool, one other thing you'll notice, we did a little bit of color coding and shading of our different tabs on the tool just to help organize the different parts of a tool a little better. Obviously, the summary and the loan portfolio summary tabs are the kind of the executive summary of CECL, and then the more detailed tabs are the what would you call that, peach color, Sean? And then the upcoming commitments are kind of separated over there on the side. So that's just a little bit to help you visually organize. But if we go to our CECLSolver resources button, you will see on Monday a new link here called the historical loss data and calculation tool. When you click on that, so it says, it explains what the tool is and how it's to be used. You need to have access to, you need to have downloaded our Excel add-in tool first, which I'll show you how that works momentarily. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Excel add-in tool, it's just a small piece of add-in software that it downloads automatically. And when you open up Excel on your ribbon up top, you'll have a QwickAnalytics button, and that'll give you a bunch of options to download and do a lot of things with our QwickAnalytics data directly in an Excel environment. But once you've downloaded that, then you can click on download the file, and I'm going to do that. It's going to pop up right here. Give me a second. Hopefully, I don't know what screen it's going to come up on here. So Here we go. All right, so as soon as you open up the file, you'll notice it's all zeros, right? It says that this model can automatically refresh the data in this file with data from your bank. Refreshing the data will override any edits you've done historically. Do you want to go ahead and refresh it? I'll say yes. And again, we're using our guinea pig for today is Camden National Bank. They're kind of a large community bank up in the Northeast. And that's it. I hit close and voila. So that took, this will open up and it'll do it for your bank. You don't have to choose your bank's information. The second that I opened up this file, it downloaded, and this is the entire tool. So you'll notice this is the formatted tab. This tab looks pretty much exactly like, hold on one second. I want to give you the side by side here. Close this tab. Right, so right here we have all of our balances. This is the historical detail for CECL, where we look at balances, charge-offs, recoveries, net charge-offs, lifetime loss ratios. All the historical detail that goes into the tool is pretty much perfectly recreated right here in the Excel environment. You'll notice that it lets you know kind of what you can go right here to updating your WARMs. As you update WARMs, if I put in 5 years, 4 years, 3 years, everything is recalculating on the fly, all the way down to the lifetime loss rates. So it allows you to kind of do a complete audit of the historical part. And what I mean by that is everything in the tool, right? All the data is coming from the call reports. So the first step is, well, how do we prove that every single data point is coming from what call report when? And so right here, the raw data tab, every single value on here is a direct one-to-one value from your call report. There's no manipulation, no math, no calculations. These are all the call report values that go into the entire tool for every quarter going all the way back to 2008. So this is all the call report data. You notice we also have custom segmentation here. So this is an area where if you wanted further customization of a tool, saying we've had a big, loan held for sale portfolio, and I know we can back it out of the current balances right on the interactive tool, but we kind of want to create a new segment going all the way back in time and plug in all the quarterly data, going back 15 years. You can come in here and you can add in custom segmentation right here. If you had an issue with a call report filing that you haven't, fixed with the FDIC yet, but you wanted to come in and manually manipulate an old call report value because of a restructuring or something like that, you could do that here. So this is where you come in and see all your raw data and then change anything or customize anything that you need to. Then there's an intermediate. So I wanted to take you through every single step that would be necessary to completely validate and audit the final results, right? So you have charge-offs and recoveries and balances on the call report, and they're all in a year-to-date format, right? So the first thing we have to do is we have to translate year-to-date values into discrete quarterly values. If you're going to add up, right, quarterly values over time, you need to do that. So here are gross charge-offs on a quarterly basis, and you can see that we're taking them right from the raw data. So all these are just links to the raw data. And there's gross recoveries, net charge-offs year-to-date, net charge-offs quarterly, net charge-off ratio year-to-date, all those intermediate mathematical steps that come directly from the call report data that then feed into the final result. These values will match 100% to the historical tab in your tool. You can change look back periods, you can change WARMs, and everything will recalculate on the fly. So like I said, I changed the WARMs here to 5, 4, and 3. I can come here and if I'd like, I can choose a different look back period. I can go back 6 years if I want to, or 7 years, or more like 8 years, I guess, on the 1 to 4 family. As soon as I change a look back period, the average balance recalculated, the aggregate charge-offs recalculated, the net charge-offs, and then thereby the even all of it. So that's how the Excel tool works. It's designed to, again, completely audit. It's designed for any of those those kind of one-off situations where we wouldn't build something into the tool interactively, but you need to make some more detailed calculations. Just be cognizant of where you want to make changes in this tool, right? On the formatted table, you're plugging in warms and look back periods. That's it. If you're making changes or adding custom segments or doing anything like that, you do it in the raw data, right? That's the source data for the tool. The intermediate tab really is not for you guys to be changing, because it's simply just calculations from the raw data, including any custom segments. So if you add a custom segment to your raw data, for example, test, it automatically translates itself to the intermediate and to the formatted. So all you have to do is make changes to raw data and make changes to warms and lookbacks on the formatted sheet. Sean?
All right, great, Steve.
And here are all the things, by the way, you can do in the, for any of you on the call who are completely unfamiliar with the Excel add-in tool. Once you download it, you have the ability to come in here, search for banks, do filtering, pull up balance sheet, income statement, custom templates for individual banks and side-by-sides. There's an absolute ton of data that you can get directly in the Excel environment. You can build it right into your own models and have it update on the fly. So for those of you who aren't familiar, who'd like a tour just of the add-in and all its functionality in Excel, please don't hesitate to give us a call and we'll be happy to walk you through it. But you do need to have it downloaded in order to utilize this this tool for CECL.
Great, thanks, Steve. And again, you know, as we discussed previously, you know, our thinking, excuse me, on introducing this or developing this, again, really sprang from conversations with you or many of you regarding a couple of, you know, topics. One being, you know, the ability to maybe further separate out or break down a loan portfolio, particularly in instances maybe where the, you know, maybe you discontinued some type of lending. And so now the historical loss rates don't fully reflect you know, what's going on moving forward. And so it just gave you the ability to kind of make some of those changes again. And then secondly, when we talk about validations, right, we have this, you know, this bifurcated path, right? On the one hand, you need our SOC 1, which is what we do to go to an outside auditor and have them validate our tool. But also from the reg, from your point of view, you have to do two things, or potentially can be asked to do two things. One, you need to get our SOC 1, but then two, they may ask you to independently validate our tool. This is typically done one of two ways. Oftentimes a bank might hire somebody to do it, or if the bank can do it independently, then they can avoid having to pay that third party. The idea in building our tool is that then you could come in and you know, essentially rerun everything in the Excel tool as an independent validation of what CECLSolver is doing. So those were really the two catalysts for why we, you know, built this, and so appreciate Steve, you know, tackling that. You know, we've had some questions come in on where can you find this. So again, it will be under the CECLSolver resources button on Monday. Again, we were hoping to have it today, but you know, when we released it earlier this week, we had a few bugs, so we took it down. So it'll be out there Monday, but it will be in the CECLSolver resources button. And then you'll, again, first off, need to download the add-in tool. And then if you haven't already, but then once you've done that, then you can just download it from the link. Steve, anything else you want to add there?
Nope, I'm just kind of showing everyone those screens again if they were looking for them. I know everything looks a little bit weird with this big orange bar up the top here. That's just a visual representation of that. It's an internal version of our site that I get to use. So yeah, so that's right there in the resources, historical loss data and calculation tool. Download the add-in if you hadn't already. As soon as you have, then you can download the file. It'll open right up. It'll immediately ask you to log in, and then it'll immediately pop up and say, hey, do you want this to populate with your bank's data? You're going to say yes. And then boom, you're off and running.
Great. We had another question come in. Let's see. Yeah, Mustafa, yeah, we like I said, we released it earlier this week. We took it down just because we had we found a few bugs, so we we took it down to take care of those. So again, we had our IT call yesterday. The expectation is we'll release the updated version with the corrections over the weekend. So hopefully Monday when you come in, it will be there, right, Steve? That's kind of our
Yep.
operating timeline.
Yep, it's happening. It's happening over the weekend, so probably actually might it'll be there at some point during the weekend. Is a wait for Monday. If I'm happy if you guys are so excited, you're going to pull it up on Sunday morning, and it might be there, but it might not. It'll be at some point during the weekend.
Yeah. We had another question come in. Recently had regulators ask for more detail on our ACL policy on handling individually assessed loans. Any thoughts? Yeah, so I mean, I think my thought on that is, I'm surprised they're asking for it. One of the things that was a change from the ACCL to ACL was the reduced expectation and requirements around individually assessed loans, in particular impaired loans, in the analysis you used to have to do for that. So, again, I think what the thought, typically is, usually when you get to an individually assessed, you're really evaluating collateral, right? You kind of anticipated you're going to take some type of loss. You're trying to really establish what the collateral that you do have is worth, and then make an assessment. So, I think you can make some, put together some verbiage around that. Again, I wouldn't be too specific, but I am surprised because, again, that was one of the things that CECL actually sought to reduce, was the burden, for impaired loans.
Well, we've seen that, and we've seen that play out with most of our users, and after talking to auditors and regulators as well, because of the lack of formality around the definition of when it needs to be individually assessed. We had some objective measures in the old in the old incurred loss method that helped us define when a loan is impaired, the old impairment standard, right? And the old TDR standard. Well, the old impairment standard ceased to exist and was replaced with the CECL standard. And now that TDRs have gone the way of the dodo, we don't have that as a threshold either. So the question then becomes, well, what is the acceptable or appropriate threshold at which a loan now needs to be removed from, the collective pool and assessed on an individual basis? And the language is not well defined, and it's pretty mushy. It's whenever that loan no longer exhibits similar risk characteristics to any other loans in your pools. So we're doing all this based upon the definition of the word similar enough, right? And so since they haven't done a great job of defining that, I would put that threshold very high. Otherwise, you're doing more work than you probably need to, and unless and until you're asked to do more work on that side, I don't see the necessary reason to do so, especially given the fact that our historical analysis, right, your starting point for an ACL analysis, a CECL analysis is, well, what would history suggest would be our losses over the lives of loans? Well, the historical detail that we calculate is not just on the past portfolio, right? The historical loss rates that we're using as our starting point include the good, the bad, and the ugly loans. So all those loans that you would have deemed impaired in the past, probably the ones that, resulted in the majority of your losses historically, are already factored into and built into your historical loss rates. So there is a lot of defense for, loans. It should be a very high threshold, in my opinion, as to whether when a loan gets stripped out and is not similar in any way to the rest of the pool from a loss perspective, and needs to be handled individually. Sean?
Yeah, I think that's really well said, Stephen. Again, I think the critical piece is when the loan does not exhibit the same characteristics or quality of the overall portfolio. So, if I'm thinking about putting something into policy, I think I'd start with something succinct like that, somewhat intentionally vague. But I think next month when we have Paul Allen on, Paul would say the same thing, right? That's what the standard says, is when the loans don't exhibit the same qualities of the larger pool. That's really what the standard
Similar,
says, and I
similar
think I
quote.
would
Yeah.
start there. I'm sorry?
Yeah. Similar, not
Similar.
exactly the same. If it's slightly
Yeah.
different, you know, they're all at some point you just get to a ridiculous, but well, no two loans are perfectly identical in their risk characteristics, and so then you're individually assessing everything, which was obviously not the intent, the opposite of the intent of CECL.
Yeah. Okay. Let me see. I think we got most of the chats and questions that came.
The next question we'll be discussing actually when we go through the look back periods in just a minute here on the next couple slides. So
Gotcha.
Vince,
and then
we're going to catch you in a minute.
Yeah, and then I think I forgot to say at the top, right? Everything's recorded. You will receive an email with a link to today's recording and a copy of the slides. So we had a question, yeah, I failed to say that at the top of the webinar. Another question came in around this. Don't you still need to evaluate a loan for impairment once they reach your delinquency threshold? And if you do so, why wouldn't you strip it out and reserve for the collateral shortfall until you charge it off? I think that's exactly it. That's really typically what most banks do. Again, I don't know how necessarily you write that into a policy. Maybe that's as plainly as you can do it. But that's essentially in practice what in fact you are doing. And again, that's why I think it's kind of understood. That's what most banks do. And I guess what you're actually doing and what needs to be in a policy, I guess I'm just surprised that they want that level of or that needs to be said in a policy to do it, but maybe it does. So, but yes, David, thank you for that. I think that's exactly right. Okay, so let's move on to the next section. We're going to look back again at this look back period analysis and customization. This again is something that's optional. I want to emphasize that before we get into it. But again, I think one of the things that we do discuss with a number of banks is some optionality and some variability in evaluating loss periods and look back periods. And so again, this tool that we built in or developed was really with that spirit in mind. Again, I want to emphasize, though, it's optional, right? It's not required. But Steve, why don't you go ahead and kind of talk through
Yeah,
that?
well, first I'll start with the screen with the slide, and then I'll actually move to the tool itself to further kind of show it live. But just on the screen here, I'll kind of explain, instead of just me going through again, reminding everyone how to update their look back periods once the new call report data is available, I thought it was a better opportunity to kind of discuss live again the variability and the ability to customize those look back periods separate from the warm, right? When we designed the tool initially, intuitively for us, making an assumption that the look back period, a good starting point for a look back period for each segment would be equal to the warm. If you have a segment like a mortgage portfolio that has a relatively long life on average, it makes sense that we might be looking further into the past using a longer look back period to determine losses over a lifetime, right? Where a lifetime might be 7, 8, 9, 10, 12 years, even with depreciation taken into account and prepayments. Whereas a construction loan might have a lifespan, 3/4 of a year. So if you're looking back 12 years for your, construction loans, you're looking back 15 lifetimes, whereas you'd only be looking back one lifetime for the mortgage portfolio. So that's always made sense to us intuitively, and it still does. However, there's a lot of situations where you might want to be taking into account a longer historical period of time in your calculations, even though you have a short warm, or vice versa. If you've got a really long warm for your mortgage portfolio, but 5 years ago you guys did a merger and you only really want to take into account a 5-year time frame, even though you have a 10-year warm, you can do that now by customizing the beginning or the end date of a look back period independently from the length or duration of the warm. And when you do that, it just requires a bit of additional math. And I'm going to show you guys again how that math works, right? It's easy to do the math if you've got a 5-year warm and a 5-year look back, because your lifetime loss rate is just equal to the aggregate losses during that 5-year look back period. However, if you've got a 5-year warm and a 2-year look back, we're taking that 2 years worth of data, but we have to multiply it by 5/2 to get 5 years worth of expected losses out of a 2-year time frame, right? So that's the additional math that has to be done if we're not matching warms and lookbacks. So that's kind of described in this screenshot here. And you'll notice at the bottom part there, I gave an example. Extended recent period of negligible losses in your mortgage portfolio. You have a 7.5-year warm for your mortgage loans. And over that entire period, you've aggregated 16 total basis points of charge-offs. I'm pretty sure they're not going to be super comfortable with your ACL on your mortgage portfolio being 16 basis points, right? Despite that being the total losses you sustained over that entire 7.5-year period. So what do most banks do? Well, it's all in the Q factors, right? You have very little historical losses. So all your work is in building and justifying and defending Q factors. There's another option here. What if we were to say, hey, we have a 7.5-year warm, but I want to go back and I want to use 15 years of history so that I can capture the entire last credit crunch, right, in my historical data. That'll give me a larger historical loss rate, and I'll do less work maybe, or spend less time on the Q factors portion of it. So that's a screenshot from it. Let me show you how that would work in live. So Sean, we're gonna.
Yeah, I'm gonna stop. And
right.
while Steve's doing that, I think that's really I think that's an important point. Again, this is an optional feature, but that's really kind of where it resonated, and the genesis of it was that for many of you, based on the warms you had in a lot of your loan pools in your most recent history, there was simply no losses or negligible losses to have that starting loss history point. And so what Steve just said and what we considered was the idea, well, let's take into account the entire history of what we have for you. That again would include the financial crisis. So now we're really getting a complete economic cycle, the good, the bad, and the ugly, but then bringing it down to a warm that you currently have and giving you a number. And so it's just a level of flexibility, a level of optionality, potentially more encompassing to again give you choices. Don't have to do it. It's just
right. It's not always a better. I mean, I hear follow-up questions in my head already from people like, well, if I can go back to 2008, why wouldn't I just do that for every segment of the portfolio all the time and always have this 15-year look back period, no matter what my warm is, so that I'm taking into account more than an entire business cycle? And my answer is, well, that might be appropriate for some of you. Some of you might not have 15 years worth of data. I know there's not many de novos out there, but they do exist. Some of you might have done a merger 7 years ago and said anything more than 7 years, or switched the whole management team out 4 years ago. There's lots of reasons why data from the last credit cycle might not be applicable to your current expectations at all. But if it is, we now have the option to do that. So I pulled up a tool. Let's pretend this is all 1 quarter ago, right? This was as of this whole scenario was run as of March 31st. We now have June 30th data. We know that because we see that there is June 30th values available. None of the look back periods are using the June 30th because this is my old scenario that I'm about to update. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come up to the set common date range. I'm going to say, hey, I want to roll this whole thing forward a quarter so I can now take into account the new call report data. I just did that. I apply the change. You'll see all these blue bars switch over one. And now we're taking into account June 30th call report data in this scenario. So I'm now updating an old scenario. When I'm done, I'll save it as a new, right? I'm not going to resave over the old one because then I will have lost my ACL snapshot from that period. I rolled it forward, but I'm looking at my mortgage portfolio. I've got a 7.5-year warm. I scroll down to my charge-offs, and we're looking at 15 basis points of aggregate losses over the entire 7.5-year period. And so it's like, I'm going to have a lot of work to do in my Q factors, right? because this is a big, huge part of my portfolio, and that's just not going to cut it. So now instead, I'm looking back here and I'm seeing, well, there was the last credit crisis, right? We have, look at those much higher losses, annual net charge-off rates for the mortgage portfolio in 2009, 10, 11, 12, 13, and then it started trailing off in 14, 15, and then from 16 on, it's been pretty much negligible. I can choose to say, hey, I'm going to take my look back period. I'm going to go back to 2012. I'm going to take account everything back to 2012. So now we have a much longer look back period. We're taking into account all this data, right? So this is what, 11 and a half years worth of data, but we still have a WARM of 7.5 years. So we've now, this is aggregate losses over the look back. We've now got 57 basis points of aggregate losses, but it's over an 11-year look back period. So now we have to add the math in, right? So if we have 57 basis points over an 11-year period, but we only have a WARM of 7.5 years, you have to take that 57 and divide it or multiply it by 7.5 over 11, right? So we end up with a 7.5-year loss rate. That's what CECL is about, estimating losses over the remaining life of the asset. If we've calculated that remaining life as 7.5 years, we want 7.5-year expected total loss. This 57 basis points is 11.5 years expected loss. So we multiply it by 0.65 and we get a 37 basis points losses aggregate over the 7.5-year WARM. That's what you're looking for CECL, right? Expected losses over the WARM. Even though you had 57 basis points over the look back period, your look back period is now longer than your WARM. So this is where the additional math comes in. And
Steve, let's pause for a second. We're getting a lot of questions.
Okay.
All right. So let's try to take some of these. So first off, okay. The question came in, shouldn't you not use look back periods beyond your current WARM and handle reasonable loss rates through your Q factors? Absolutely. Like, again, that's what I'm saying. This is an optional tool. You do not have to use it. You are perfectly fine to use the tool as designed in your current WARM. This, again, the genesis of this tool or this option, this functionality came from people who had very benign loss rates, who were trying to find, trying to make sure they didn't want to rely completely on their Q factors. They wanted to start with a more objective, look back just based on their history. And by looking at a longer period, they felt more comfortable. But it is perfectly acceptable to never use this tool.
There is nothing in the CECL standard anywhere that defines what is an appropriate look back period. I've seen tools out, and our tool, I think, honestly takes a much more flexible and balanced approach. Most of the tools that I've seen out there, even ones created by and blessed by regulators, pick an arbitrary number for the look back period, like 6 years for the whole portfolio, for every segment, no matter what type of loan it is, 6-year look back period. And it just, they're literally pulling numbers out of thin air. We're not pulling numbers out of thin air. We're actually using either the WARM as our guide, which seems very intuitive. And that's also something that we've discussed at length with examiners and auditors, and they've agreed that that seems perfectly reasonable. Or in cases where you want to use a longer or shorter, have a justification, right? You will need, if you take a very different look back period than your WARM, it is something where you'll probably need to justify it, right? Whenever you step out of the bounds of this kind of a standard practice, you're going to need a reason for it. So it doesn't look like you're trying to manipulate the data. And so I think the more you customize it, I think this makes sense, the more you'll have to justify those customizations. And that's where the points for paper comes in, right? And that's what any auditor will tell you is document, document, document. So if you have a good reason why you're using a longer or shorter look back period, that's fine. Just explain it. And you can go either way. We have banks that really prefer to get as much of a loss into their historical record as possible, so that they're justifying this part of it and spending less time on detailed Q factor adjustments. And there's banks that are exact opposite. So it really depends upon how you want to do it, the relationship you have with your auditors and your examiners, how they like to see it. It's an interplay between all those factors.
Yeah. Hi, Jeff. Thanks for the question. Would you do both, adjust Q factors and adjust look back period? You certainly could. Yeah, you certainly could.
Yeah, it's not an either or. It's really the wild, wild west when it comes to that. As long as you can, as long as, it's all the language that you hear from the auditors, reasonable and, those kind of, amorphous terms. If you think it's reasonable to do both and you can explain it, then it's absolutely acceptable to do it.
Yeah. Steve, I know you just covered this, but maybe just one more time. We had a question just on what the look back multiplier is. And again, in its simplest form, it's really, the math of if you're taking a longer look back period and bringing it down to a smaller warm, the math to get you there.
So if you got a 2-year warm and you got 2 years worth of look back period, your multiplier is going to be 1, right? If you've got 2 years of warm and you decide you only want a 1-year look back, then your multiplier is going to be 2. So because what we're doing is this column here is the aggregate losses over the look back period. So if we have 1-year look back period, our aggregate losses, I know I'm using zeros here, so it's not particularly helpful from a math standpoint, but we're using 1 year worth of look back, but we have a 2-year lifetime. So we have to take that 1 year worth of aggregate losses, multiply it by 2 to get an estimated 2 years of future losses, right? So that's what the multiplier is. Most of the time, not all the time, most of the time you'll be extending look back periods to be longer than warms, especially for things like construction loans and things like that, or mortgage loans where you want to go, you want to get back to the last credit cycle. But there are times where the opposite happens, right? If you have a really long warm, if you've got a, 10-year warm on your mortgage portfolio, which is pretty long after taking into account amortization, prepayments, and all that stuff, even though prepayments are really low right now. But you said, listen, we were all completely different bank in 2014, 15, and 16, right? We've doubled in size since then. We have a whole new credit department, et cetera, et cetera. Those numbers aren't really acceptable, appropriate, or helpful in estimating going forward. I'm going to shorten the look back period. I'm just going to go back to 2017. We still have a 10-year warm, but now we only have, well, let me go back to even closer. More like we have a 5-year look back period. So if we've aggregated 3 basis points in losses over 5 years, what would we aggregate over 10 years? 6 basis points, right? 3 basis points over the 5 years multiplied by 2, which is just look back period, lifetime or warm divided by the look back. So if the warm is twice the look back, it's 2. And then you get 6. So that's how the math works there. It's just a way to allow you the flexibility you want in the look back, and it still automatically calculates appropriate warm-based lifetime loss rates. That should be, yeah, that's it. I mean, that's the best way I can explain it.
The next question is it justifiable to have different look back periods for each pool of loans?
Absolutely. I wouldn't say it's not justifiable to not have that because it's pretty common. I see it out there all the time. Like I said, lots of other tools just pick an arbitrary 7-year chunk for the whole portfolio, not because it makes sense, but because it's easy. What our tool does by default is look at each segment and consider the duration of those segments, how long a lifetime is in considering what the default look back period is. But I think, yeah, I mean, I think it makes a lot more sense to do what our tool does, having a different look back period for each segment based upon the characteristics of that pool, right? The duration of it, the average length of it, your management team, the size, how you've been growing, all that stuff should factor into it. I think it would take more justification to pick a random 7-year period across the board. Why not 8? Why not 6?
All right, so Steve, maybe you can scroll up. The next question is just on where they can find the reports and share with boards and the examiners just up at the top there. Just
oh yeah, sure. So when you're done with your analysis here, always before you do anything else, save it as a new scenario. I'll save this till the day I die. Don't resave if you're halfway through building a scenario and you can resave it. Once you've built a scenario and saved it, you're coming back at a later date to do something different based upon new data, based upon whatever. Save it as a new scenario. We're not charging by the scenario. This drop-down list can go on forever with as many as you want to have. It's safer that way, right? When you're ready to show examiners, external, whatever, you go to the export button. This gives you full functionality. flexibility in what you want to share, depending upon your audience, right? Your board wants a summary. They probably want the loan portfolio summary. They definitely don't need all this stuff. They might want the peer data. They'll probably want the Q factors, and that's it. And you say, hey, give me that as a PDF. Boop, boop, boop. There we go. Here's a PDF with a kind of executive summary, the summary of the whole loan portfolio with the basic math, any notes that you've taken, and then Q factors. I didn't plug any Q factors in here, so there are no Q factors. But they're in here. So that would be, you know, a board report versus an auditor. You'd be like, all right, I want everything. So you're going to check on everything, and then you're going to export it to PDF or Excel. You can export to Excel as well. Now, keep in mind, this is an export of the output of the tool into Excel. When you export into Excel here, you don't have a fully functional model in Excel that you can update in the future and never come back here to use the interactive tool. That would never work. It wouldn't be practical even if you could, because things change and new data becomes available and new functionality becomes available. But so it's more of a, you know, so it's a hard-coded, so to speak, export. But it retains all the formatting. Here, let me not do the entire thing because that'll take a minute. But let me pick a couple peer data and some sure, and do Excel. I'm gonna do this, do that, and there it is. So the Excel export does retain a good amount of the formatting. It's decently attractive. It's something you can print right from Excel if you wanted to. Sometimes people are asking me, you know, if I want to make some additional notes that aren't in the areas that you guys allow notes, or if I want to add another column or some explanatory stuff, what's the best way to do that? Export it to Excel, and then you can add a column wherever you want. It won't mess up the math because these are all hard-coded. And you can, you know, you can customize the output a little bit, put some extra explanations, do some additional calculations if you want to, whatever you want to do directly in the Excel environment, and then print right from here. And it's decently formatted enough so that you can present it from an Excel print, if that makes sense.
Great. Nate, thanks for answering that question. That's a good response to Jose's question regarding look back periods, you know, and utilizing all the available information. So if everybody's following in the chat, I'm not going to recover everything, but I think Nate's answer there is great. So thank you for doing that. I appreciate everybody's questions. I got a few more here. So the next one is, will the regulators really let banks be more lax on Q factors if the look back is 2 times the WARM? Also, if we look back too far and we're in another economic downturn, would banks not be double hitting the risk analysis? So again, you know, I think there's a lot to unpack here. I don't think it's necessarily being lax on the Q factors. I think it's more a function of where the you know, where your loss numbers are coming from, right? So, or what's it dependent upon, right? Is if you haven't had any loss history in the recent years, then obviously you're relying on your Q factors to support or justify a reserve. However, if you look potentially at a much longer economic cycle, because again, what are we doing? We're using our past numbers to predict the future, right? So if we use a bigger economic downturn and we're pulling in our own actual losses, then we're still relying on our Q factors, but maybe not as much. It's really it's a subjectivity thing. It's really what you're more comfortable with. Either way is fine, but this is art as much as it is science, right? And some people have a preference that they'd rather have it be more objective and less subjective, and so they want to use more of their own actual data. So it's really it's not a right or wrong thing, right? It's really
there's no guidance here for it. It's simply what would history suggest, and how do we think current and future conditions might be different than history. So either you say my recent history is blank, but what if a downturn were to happen? So I need Q factors. Or I took the last downturn into account, so my Q factors are minimal because I've already built it into the historical analysis. So you really can put more weight on a long, and this I'm assuming here that the hypothetical bank, which is the average bank's experience, was that you did have higher losses during 2009, 10, 11, 12 range. Not everybody did. There's plenty of banks out in different parts of the country that really didn't experience the last credit cycle very much at all, because of their local economy or whatnot. So 15, we deal with banks that have 15 years worth of zeros. Well, then, the look back period is irrelevant, isn't it? Because history won't support any reserve because you've never had a loss. And so it's always going to be Q factors no matter what. So it depends upon, and I'm not going to be one of those guys that say, well, we can't answer because it depends on everyone's situation and they're all different. It does, but you can go either way. But you do want to make sure you don't run the risk of double dipping, right? If you take into account losses from the last credit cycle and you had more significant losses during the last credit cycle, you've already got a pretty good size ACL just based upon the historical component. If you don't go in and then take that into account, factor that into your Q factors, if you will, then yeah, you're double dipping. You're saying, these are my losses in good times and bad times. I've already taken them into account. Now I'm going to add a 1% Q factor. That would be you suggesting that the future is going to be even worse than the last credit cycle. And that would be, double dipping on your expected losses. So you got to balance how much of history and how much of, future Q factors you want to do. Just think about it as this is the biggest, most subjective, but most important part of CECL in general.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Thanks, Cindy, for your comments on the chat. Jose, again, I appreciate that. For those of you following along in the chat feature, the next question, where are ag loans included? I see the farmland loans. So, Steve, maybe just touch on that again.
Yeah, we're working on getting ag loans in. The problem with ag loans is the design of the call reports, right? As you know, as I'm sure all of us are very familiar with, me in particular, the call reports change over time, right? And the segmentation that we have on the loan portfolio for different loan types has changed over time. Now, I know the first comeback is going to be, well, ag loans have always been on the call reports. What are you talking about? Balances for ag loans have always been separate on the call reports. Charge-offs and recoveries have not necessarily always been consistently as its own segment on the call reports. There have been, in the past, there were thresholds where if you didn't have a certain size or amount of it, then you didn't have to separately report it and it would go into the catch-all bucket. So we've had difficulty. It's impossible to perfectly measure losses on ag loans as a completely discrete segment going all the way back in time because of this. All that being said, we can do it. It's just not gonna be perfect. So we're working on adding it in there because we know it's important, very important to some of you. We're just gonna have some footnotes when we do that. Hey, there are some limitations to how we're calculating this because it's not a perfectly calculatable thing going all the way back in time due to call report restrictions.
Thank you, Steve.
Long-winded answer.
Yeah. The next one is, isn't it allowed to claim your bank is quote unquote non-complex and use simplified analysis, such as using the same look back period for all segments and or using the same Q factors for all segments? Absolutely. Again, I think, we started this conversation and I'll say it again. This is an optional, piece of functionality in the tool. You do not need to subscribe to it. You don't have to believe anything we just talked about. You don't have to do anything with it. It's simply there as an additional tool should you decide to want to consider it.
And you have to take extra steps to do it. When we add functionality and add enhancements like this to the tool, one of the most difficult things that we do, that we make sure that we do, is if you don't want to do this additional step, you don't have to. And by default, it won't do it, right? So by default, if you go into the tool, plug in your warms and each quarter and update your balances and your Q factors, you're good already, right? The tool will handle the look back periods and recalculate them to match your warms as you add in your warm for the next quarter. You have to take the additional step of customizing those drop down boxes for the look back periods if you want to use this extra functionality we're talking about. So by default, it'll still work like it did before, unless you take the extra step of saying, hey, I want a look back period that's different. So here it is.
We had a suggestion coming from Ryan. I noticed that when I hit the resave button, there's no warning prompt that lets you know you're about to overwrite existing data, especially if by mistake you meant to hit save as new. Just a suggestion. That's a good one.
That's an excellent suggestion. It might save me having to mention it all the time. So yeah, so I think we'll do that. We'll add a little pop-up on the resave. That's kind of one of those, are you sure you want to save over this? That's
okay, I think I've gotten to everybody's questions. I appreciate all of them. Thank you for your patience as we got through those. Let me jump back into the screen share. I think we're almost approaching the hour, so
we can fly through some other stuff that we just kind of wanted to point out to everybody.
These are, again, just a reminder of some additional functionality we have in QwickAnalytics, to let you see your asset quality over time. So, again, trying to understand your portfolio, support any Q factors or just trends you might be seeing. Again, don't forget that all of this is available to you in the credit section on your bank page. Steve, you want to touch on any of these?
Yeah, so just these are all available to everybody. The asset quality detail is very granular as the call report gets. So you can see 30 to 89 days past due balance and as a percentage for each segment of your portfolio, and then 90 plus, although 90 plus isn't used so much these days. And then non-accruals, and even the segmentation that we have around Oreo. We don't have a lot, but there is a little bit of segmentation around Oreo that exists on the call reports. As you guys know, that's in this page too. And so you can really get some really good detailed emerging credit loss trends, right? If you're looking at Q factors, trying to support a Q factor because your historical charge-offs don't have much in there, then you go, how far upstream can you go in the call report? Well, 30 to 89 days is kind of the first time a credit issue is going to show up in the call report. And especially with, so now you can look at that trend and say, well, we have an increasing, 30 to 89 days on our 1 to 4 family, and so does our peer group. That right there is a justification for a Q factor adjustment that, up on top of your historical actual, where it hits the income statement on the charge-offs. Next page, concentration report. This is just for those of you who haven't seen this page before, it's a great detailed way to just look at your loan concentrations compared to risk-based capital. Obviously, that changed a little bit once we got into the CBLR era, I guess if we want to call it that. And so there's a CBLR framework. You can look at all your concentrations based upon the CBLR framework, which is percentage of tier 1 capital plus the reserve, or the old risk-based framework where all these things are as a percentage of total risk-based capital. I know for many of you, there's no real difference between tier 1 and LLR plus LLR is kind of equal to your total risk-based capital or close to it. So if you toggle between those two green buttons, you might not see much of a difference, and that's fine. But this is a great way to see those concentrations and track them over time and compare them to your peer group. Next one, Sean.
Yeah, Steve, if you want to just maybe take a quick second. The one question came is where are these pages located? And so again, I don't know if you just want to quickly show them on the bank pages, where. So these are part of your on your My Bank page in QwickAnalytics. So,
yeah, when you first log in, so I'm in the CECLSolver tool, but I can always go back. I can click here or click here. This will bring us to the home page. You're I'm logged out, so I'm gonna log in. There we go.
But it's on, yeah.
This is when you first log in, right? And the CECL tool is here. The credit stress test is here. Some other things are here, but the My Bank page is what we call it. This is kind of your bank's home page financially. You can click on My Bank or click on your bank name, either one. And when you do that, this is the entire host of all of these pages that exist for under QwickAnalytics. This is a financial overview. And again, you can change periods, change dates, change peer groups, change durations, export, single click to anything you want to. You can go into the map. You can look at market share. I can spend days talking to you guys about this, but that particular page is asset quality detail. Asset quality summary just shows kind of top level, total charge-offs, total non-accruals. Asset quality detail shows you an entire page or an entire length of page just on 30 to 89 days. This is just 30 to 89 days for this bank in dollars and percents. This is all 90 days, a lot of zeros. This is all non-accruals. This is restructured loans, which are, this is OREO. We do have a little bit of segmentation on the OREO. Gross charge-offs, gross recoveries, net charge-offs. So a lot of granularity and a long page. But you can also customize all these charts up top if there's a couple you really want to look at. 30 to 89 days as a percentage for 1 to 4 family. You can kind of use that, choose that chart as a summary chart here and compare it to the peer group over 5-6 years, over 6 quarters, over whatever period you want. You notice as you click on these different buttons, all the data updates on the fly. And you're always 1 click away from a PDF, an attractive, reasonable PDF output or Excel output or anything else. And, we've got, and we keep adding to, we're always adding to this. These are ones we showed you guys last month.
Yeah. Let's keep moving, Steve, since we're
sure.
Kind of going over time.
Yeah, I know.
All right. So that's the loan concentration. The credit risk matrix is another, just kind of top down, quick kind of comparable relative comparison to a peer group on a number of credit metrics. I emphasize it's relative. It's not meant to be good, bad, or, ugly. It's just a relative comparison of different credit metrics to a peer group. Steve, anything to add there?
Nope. And there's nothing absolute about it. It's just comparing you to the peer group on a percentile basis. The flexibility that I like about this is we allow you to kind of choose what areas you think are more important or should have more weight in the analysis. So there's a column there. You'll notice there's a risk multiplier, and you can, if you increase or decrease those, it explains how to do that on the page. But you can increase or decrease specific metrics if you think that they're a more important part of credit risk for your institution. So you can kind of customize this a little bit. It's a great little report to share with the board on a regular basis, so they have kind of a general concept of the credit risk versus whatever peer group you want with some customized weighting. Sean?
Great. We had a question come in. If we put monthly data in CECLSolver, will we be able to see some of that information for some of these graphs for trends? Currently, no, but I think that's something, again, we're going to touch here just briefly at the end on IntelliCredit. That's an area where that we can start to do that and give you more monthly type of data support. So that was actually one of the things. I know we're short on time, but that we were going to discuss just briefly here. With IntelliCredit. The industry ACL data, again, we talked about last time, just the way you can kind of monitor some of the larger banks, what they're doing with their analysis, the industry credit trends and economic trends, again, just a way to visually see a lot of information quickly on your screen. And then, as we've touched on, Steve, we talked about this last time, the NIM page, we did a webinar on this. So certainly, reach out to us if you missed that webinar. Steve did a nice job of explaining this new functionality. Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, we can send you a link to the webinar from that if you have any interest in listening to that. That's no problem.
Great.
Go ahead.
And then, we touched on this a bit last month as well, just the new data dictionary definitions, again, trying to give you more insight into where our numbers are coming from the call report without you having to, reach out to us. So this will be an ongoing process, but we are at least starting to make the initial efforts to get that out there. Steve, again, anything to add here?
Nope.
Okay.
I think that speaks for itself.
Okay, so, again, these are really more placeholders. As we mentioned, you will get a copy of the recording and a link to the slides. But I think, as to David's question about monthly data, I think one of the things that, we anticipated when we built CECLSolver with our IntelliCredit division is that some of you might have the thirst for more information about your portfolio. We have built that type of information in IntelliCredit. This is an area where you share data with IntelliCredit. You upload a flat file or available core data that you have. We put it into our tool, and what it really allows you to do is take control of your data and really give you a lot of additional insight and information about your portfolio on a monthly basis. Gives you great visibility into your portfolio subsets, monitoring risk grade changes, other trends that you can monitor. And we do that through a tool we call the Portfolio Analyzer, which gives you the ability to see a lot of different dashboards, and then the ability to drill down into those and actually see loans that make up the representative balances. So, again, this is something that we're going to begin to talk a little bit more about in our coffee talks. As you all have become so much more comfortable with actually CECL, you might want to, potentially consider this additional resource. We've been doing, some webinars on this. There's actually a link in the slides to one we did a month or so ago with one of our bank clients. But again, the idea is that we're turning your raw data into something that you can actually use and, serve as a tool to better, demonstrate, potentially support Q factors, better explain and understand the risk in your portfolio. So this is, we're really excited about this tool. We think it's tremendously helpful to the credit teams that are using it today. And, again, are going to begin to just try to provide some additional information about it here. And then certainly, welcome, if you want to learn more about it. So I think today's was great. I know we ran over a little bit on time. We do have some upcoming webinars. Again, next month, our dear friend Paul Allen from Saltmarsh will be here with us on the Coffee Talk. We do have an upcoming QwickAnalytics webinar. Steve's going to talk about the Excel add-in tool. So today we talked about the tool for CECL that requires you to download the add-in tool. This particular webinar, we're actually going to talk about all the functionality or some of the functionality. We couldn't do it all in an hour, but that you have available to you already as a QwickAnalytics subscriber, and show you some of the things that you can do with the add-in tool. So again, I'd certainly encourage you to register for both of these upcoming events. I previously mentioned the webinar about Portfolio Analyzer and IntelliCredit. Zane Smith from American Bank in Texas. We had him on our webinar. He talked about how he uses the Portfolio Analyzer today in his bank. We felt like it was a much more effective way to demonstrate its values, to have actually one of our subscribers talk about how he uses it. Zane is both a chief credit officer and risk officer. He's also a former examiner. So again, he loves the tool and was gracious enough to join us and talk about how he's using it in his bank. So I'd encourage you can go out and watch the replay of that, get a little bit of a flavor of the analyzer, and certainly, again, welcome the opportunity to tell you more about it in a demo. So again, thank you all so much. I know we ran over on time. I thought today's session was great. I hope you found it helpful. Steve, any final comments before we let everybody go?
No, I think we threw a lot out there at everybody, and so take the time to digest it. Go back over the presentation. If you want some more detail about any of the stuff, just reach out to your salesperson or to us, and we'll work with you.
Great. I normally don't do this, but big game for Notre Dame this weekend against Ohio State. So go Irish! But I hope everybody has a great weekend.
You mean Wake Forest? Is that correct, Sean?
Yes. Thanks so much for attending. We hope you have a great weekend, and we'll look for you on our next coffee talk. Thanks so much. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, guys.